Welcome to an in-studio interview at Live Talks Los Angeles. Today's guest is Stan Smith. Stan Smith, the man. With us, I have Stan Smith, the book, titled Some People Think I'm a Shoe. And also on the table, I have Stan Smith, the shoe. So we're going to cover how all of that
You want me to jump on the table or replace that? Or
let's go back to the very beginning. Stan, you were initially into basketball and not tennis, correct?
Well, I grew up in Pasadena, California, and basketball was my first love. And I played football in junior high school and basketball and track and field and started playing tennis then. But I played basketball and tennis until the mid-season my senior year in high school, and then gave it up because I was behind the other guys in tennis. So it was a big decision for me to give up the basketball. We had a good team, I think they went to the semifinals of CIF that year, so it would have been a chance to be on a big team.
And your dad was a tennis coach?
My dad was a coach at Pasadena City College, and he coached a number of sports, and tennis was one of those sports. He had a PhD in physical education, so he taught physical education classes as well as coached some of the teams.
And was there any particular sport that he was rooting you would be the better one at and rule and dominate?
Well, I don't think he had any idea of me ruling and dominating any sport, but the good thing about my parents were they're very supportive of everything I did. I sang in the choir, and I was involved in student activities and other sports, and so they were very supportive. They weren't pushing me hard in any one direction, and obviously encouraged me as well. But it was one of those, we have those sports parents that are just, they want to live the sport through, their kid and to make him, a champion.
Best advice your dad ever gave you as a coach?
He only gave me one piece of advice in tennis, and that was to keep my left foot still on my serve, not move around the left foot, but to keep it still as the anchor of the serve, and everything rotated around that. So that was the one piece of advice he gave me on tennis.
And what kind of shoe did you wear playing tennis in high school?
Well, I had a Converse shoe. All the shoes at that time were canvas shoes. They weren't leather shoes. They were canvas. And so my first shoes were canvas Converse shoes, and that was pretty much what a lot of players wore.
Let's just fast forward a little bit. You won Wimbledon and the U.S. Open while you were in the Army, correct?
Correct.
Tell us about that.
Well, I was in the Army for 2 years. I was drafted, and actually I was number 23 in the draft, so I knew I was going to be drafted for sure. I wasn't on the edge, but I was definitely going to be drafted. But I played a lot of tennis that year, playing Davis Cup, representing the United States, and so they allowed me to postpone it. Then I finally got my final draft notice to report the next day when I was in Tokyo playing the Masters, the first Masters tournament, the year-end tournament to determine the best player. And that was actually my birthday as well, December 14th, and I got the draft notice, and I was playing the final match to determine whether I was going to win the tournament or not. It was a round robin. I was playing Ken Rosewall, and I ended up winning that match. I had to play actually the next day because I'd already clinched the Masters, but I had to play Arthur Ashe the next night at 8 o'clock and then get on a flight on the 15th to fly back to LA. I got here on the 15th, and I reported into the draft center on the 16th, and then I had the choice of going into Fort Ord immediately and be there through Christmas, or go home for 11 days with no pay and then report on the 27th of December. So I did that, and went up to Fort Ord, and I did the 8 weeks of basic training, and I was based in Washington, D.C., and during the 2 years I played again for the U.S. Davis Cup team representing the United States, and I was able to play other tournaments so I could be match tough to play in the Davis Cup matches, and we won those years as well in Davis Cup, so it worked out well.
You bring up Arthur Ashe, and in the book you refer to him as your brother from another mother. Tell us how you became close friends with him and what it was like to tour Africa with him.
Well, Arthur was 4 years older than I, and he went to UCLA. He made that mistake of going to UCLA. Sorry, some of the listeners, but he graduated the year I started USC. But my last year in college, I was hoping to make the Davis Cup team, and Donald Dell was the captain, and Arthur was going to be on the team. He was playing great tennis. In fact, he won the U.S. Open that year in 1968 at the end of the year. But we played on the same Davis Cup team for that year in '68. So I got to know him well during that time. We actually, a couple of us guys got together and we actually formed a business as well. He was part of that, and then we did a tour of Africa, 6 countries in Africa together, and that was interesting because, you know, he was the man, and I was sort of like, you know, the Globetrotters. What was the team they played against? The Washington Stars or something like that. So they would introduce Arthur. At the time, I was actually ranked number 1 in the United States, but they introduced Arthur as the number 1 player in the United States, number 1 player in the world, one of the greatest players of all time. And his opponent was Stan Smith. And so we played exhibitions in those countries. We did clinics for the kids. We did State Department. It was a State Department tour. We did dinners and lunches and met with some of the diplomats, some of the people from those countries. But that was an interesting trip. Arthur was one of the great human beings of all time. He was a terrific player, obviously. He won the U.S. Open. He won Wimbledon as well, beating Jimmy Connors in the final. He also won the Australian Open. But he was an even better person. And it was one of those unbelievably sad days when he called me and said that he had the HIV virus. We didn't know what it was for a while. There's pressure on his brain, and he didn't know, just, you know, maybe a tumor of some sort, but then he finally realized it was the HIV virus. And so at that time, that was really, you know, almost insurmountable odds to really survive.
There's another South African you got involved with as a mentor, Mark Matabane. Could you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, Mark Matabane was a young black player in South Africa that actually played in this event. He was one of the better South African players from Alexandria, which is a township in Johannesburg. And he was watching Bob Lutz and I, my doubles partner, warm up before a match, and my wife was watching as well, and he happened to get in a conversation with her. And then after Bob finished, we warmed up, I had a few balls with him and then took him into the restaurant. I didn't realize that at that time, blacks weren't allowed to be in a restaurant, but since he came with me, I didn't even know the rule, but we had a Coke, and he wanted to come to the United States and get an education. And he was kind of an average player, not a great player, not a great even potential. When you saw him play, he was a little stiff, but I actually wrote to George Tolley, who was the coach at USC, to see if he knew any coaches that might be interested in having a player from South Africa come over, and he wrote to 10 coaches, and one of those coaches happened to be from South Carolina, where I lived by that time, and so he got a scholarship to the University of South Carolina. It didn't work out too well, and he went to another university, he went to another one, he went to 4 universities, and it was a cultural shock for him. You know, he just didn't really understand what it was like. And he was from a ghetto, really, the Alexandria township, and it was difficult for him to make that transition. But he went to a university in St. Louis, Washington University, and played some soccer, and that didn't really work out well either. But he was a great writer, and he's a very intelligent guy. And it was an example of, if you have the opportunity to get an education, you can do just about anything. And so he actually graduated finally from a university in New York, and he got the award for the top international student. And he also, at that time, started writing a book, more or less an autobiography of his life in Johannesburg and up until he came to the United States. It was called Kaffir Boy. And It was well written. It was one of the first books written by a black South African about South Africa at the time. And Oprah Winfrey was so impressed by the book, she brought his whole family over to Chicago and was on the show. And then he actually paid for his siblings to come to the United States and be educated in the United States. And he's written some other books. He got married to a very white girl, and they had 3 children. And the great, not end of the story, but one of the great parts of that story is that the 3 children all went to Princeton. And so from a young man in a township in South Africa to have 3 children to go to Princeton was, I guess, the epitome of what can be done by anybody that has an education and has the opportunities. So it was, it's been one of the great parts of my life and my wife's life to be able to, he came to our house every Christmas for about 10 years, and it's been a real success story.
Speaking of Princeton, that's, I believe, where your wife went to college, right?
Yes.
And played tennis there as well?
Yeah, she was a captain of the undefeated team, the first class of women at Princeton. So it was kind of a historic time, you know, and it was, they had the Battle of the Sexes thing where she actually played the #1 player on the junior varsity men's team, as she was the #1 player on the women's team, and they had a big crowd of about 500 people, and I actually refereed the match, umpired the match, which was probably a mistake. We were dating at the time. It wasn't a smart move on my part, but it was a moment where people were looking. It was just after the Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King match, and so she went to Princeton. That's why this whole idea with Martha Bonney's kids going to Princeton was even more meaningful to her and to 2 of her sisters who also went there.
You mentioned Bob Lutz, your doubles partner. You guys won Wimbledon 4 times, is that right?
We won the U.S. Open 4 times
US
and
Open.
lost in the Wimbledon 4 times in the finals.
But you guys as teammates have won on grass, clay, hard court, and indoor as well, right?
Right.
Which I don't believe any other player, any team has done, is that correct?
Right, and actually they don't have the opportunity to do that indoor event because it's not really being held now. But anyway, yeah, we had a good run.
What was your favorite surface?
Well, I grew up in California. We played on hard courts predominantly. I mean, there was no other courts. There weren't clay courts. There weren't grass courts. And so I didn't play on a grass court or a clay court until I was 17 years old. And so that was my favorite surface. Now I enjoy playing on a clay court because it's easier on the body and on the legs, you know. And it's not as conducive to the style of play that I had, which was an aggressive style of play, which was conducive to hard courts, fast hard courts, and also grass courts. And at that time, 3 of the 4 Grand Slams, Wimbledon, which is still grass, U.S. Open, and the Australian were on grass, and then the French was on clay. So, you know, I had some good results on grass.
So let's talk about the shoe for a little bit now. You weren't the first player or first athlete attached to this particular shoe. So tell us how Stan Smith became the shoe.
Well, the shoe was created by Horst Dassler, who was Adi Dassler's son. And he actually, Adi Dassler had 5 children, 1 son and 4 daughters. And the son sort of went a different way. He went to France instead of staying in Germany. And he really developed the French market for Adidas. And he and a French #1 player at the time, Robert Hayet, created this shoe in 1965. Went on the market in 1965. They created it in 64, and it was the first leather tennis shoe. And so in 71, Adidas the shoe was in the U.S. market, but it wasn't doing as well as they'd like, so they're looking at an American to affiliate with a shoe and bolster the U.S. market for Adidas. And I was the #1 player in the world, and an American, of course, and so we worked out an arrangement where my picture would be on the shoe, on the tongue of the shoe, as it is still today, and his name on the side. Then there's a number of iterations over 4 or 5 years, and his name was finally taken off the shoe, and ever since then it's just been a Stan Smith shoe. So it was the first leather shoe. I wore it actually before my name was on it, and it was a real high-tech shoe at the time. It was the best, most supportive, and lasted the longest, and was the best shoe on the market, being a leather shoe. Because before that, we just wore canvas, which was very, non-supportive and didn't last very long, and it was, not a very strong shoe at all. So this shoe was a great shoe, and then, so it was an honor for me to be involved with the shoe. It was an honor to be involved with Adidas, which was the greatest brand in the world, and so it's been fun to be with them ever since.
40 million pairs sold, $65 million worth of revenue in the Stan Smith shoe. That's what I hear.
It was. It's gone a little higher than that, but.
So how active are you involved in the design of, there's sort of ancillary, there's related brands. Are you involved in that at all?
Well, one of the things they've done, which has been very successful, first of all, the shoe in 2011, 10-11, was starting to lose its niche and was starting to be discounted. And so what they decided to do is they met with me and said, look, we're going to take your shoe off the market and bring it back. And they gave us, my wife and I and my agent, some very vague kind of marketing ideas of what they were going to do when they brought it back, but it wasn't real concrete. We didn't know if they really had a big commitment to do it. So at the time, we walked away from that meeting saying, well, it's been 40-some years, and it's been nice, and that's, we appreciate what's.
Maybe I can shave off my mustache.
Maybe I could shave off my mustache now and play basketball. But anyway, they took them out of the stores. They bought some of the shoes out of the stores, took them, so it was depleted all throughout the world for 2 years, 12 and 13. And in 14, December 15th of 2014, they brought it back all around the world. And they did it totally through social media. And they also, the first thing they did was actually send these shoes to about 100 influencers around the world and put their photograph on the shoe instead of mine, and ask those influencers to put it on their social media. And so they did, and it started this wave again with young people. First of all, they also said they wanted to market it to 15 to 24-year-olds when they brought it back. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. They're not going to know who I am. But little did I know, these guys were geniuses as to what they decided to do. So they got these influencers, and then they collaborated with various people. JayZ and Usher and Kate Moss, and then Pharrell was a big part when we came back in 14, and he actually did the foreword to the book, and I've gotten to know him a little bit, but it was that made the whole thing explode, these collaborations with various people and companies as well. Horveen was a leather company that they collaborated with and made a really nice, soft leather shoe. Then during this period of time with collaboration, they created all sorts of different colors and different materials, suede and that sort of thing. They actually did that prior to 2014, but they accelerated the idea of kind of limited edition shoes. And they'd come on the market, and then they'd be sold, and then they'd come out with another one. And that's a little bit what they've been doing the last four or 5 years now.
How did you feel about that? Are you a purist that the Stan Smith shoe is green like that? Some people, like hummus pure. They don't want.
Well, this has been the bread and butter. I mean,
Yeah.
This is the one that's with all the different limited editions and different versions they come out with. This has been the staple. And so, I love this shoe, obviously, but I get a little tired of wearing it all the time, so I love the
How
new.
many pairs do you have, Stan?
I probably got about 60 or 70 in the closet. I wish I had kept the first couple I wore. If I had known this was going to be around for, it's almost 50 years now, with my name on it, I would have, kept the first couple of pairs. But It was a 5-year agreement with Adidas initially, and we just kept renewing the different years and different arrangements, and so it was kind of an every 5 to 6 year arrangement, and just kept going. But this shoe has been the one that people have loved the most, and you can wear it with cutoffs, you can wear it with jeans, you can wear it with suits, you can wear it with tuxedos, and I've been to functions where guys have been in the really great looking black tuxedos and these white shoes. It looks great.
And am I right? They're not really recommended to play tennis in anymore.
Well, I don't recommend it because, they were high tech in 1972. And now they're low tech. There's a lot of, Adidas has come out with a lot more supportive shoes that help you in all the sorts of movement, that sort of thing. But so these have really become lifestyle or fashion shoes. And so I've now become a fashion icon because of that. So it's been interesting.
So does anyone in that newer, younger demographic that they've been targeting meet you and then act surprised to know that there's actually Stan Smith, the man?
Oh yeah, a lot of people do that. Well, hence the title of my book. And over the years, as I've gotten older, and of course this young demographic that they really have targeted for in that 2014 time are people that would not see me play, for sure. I mean, if you're under 40, you wouldn't see me play. So you didn't expect people to do that, and when I thought about a book, the reason I really came out with a book was to document this shoe. And it's been around, started in '64, my name's been on it since '72, and I want to make sure that a lot of people that have been around would be able to help document the history of the shoe and how it had gone. I also wanted to talk a little bit about my career, and even more importantly, maybe have people tell stories of what the shoe means to them. For instance, I was in the Royal Box at Wimbledon last year, and Hugh Grant turned around and said, "The first girl I ever kissed, I was wearing your shoe." And I've had people say, I bought the shoe for my boy. I bought 15 pairs. I gave him one every birthday for the last 10 years, and I've got 5 more years to go. And there's been all sorts of interesting stories around the shoe that, in fact, at the end of the book, I request people to share their stories and photographs on hashtag #StanSmithForever. So we can get all those stories in one place. We might even have an additional book come out with some of those stories.
I read somewhere that your son, when he was 8, asked you if the shoe was named after you or if you were named after the shoe. What was that like? Well,
that's a true story, and he was kind of a wise guy at 8 years old, and I slapped him. I didn't slap him, but I have that in the book, and then we have a picture of him when he was 8 years old playing tennis, and then we have also a picture of a drawing that his son at 8 years old last year drew, and it was a very nice rendering of the shoe in a drawing form. And so actually in a lot of different dressing rooms in Adidas stores around the world, in Paris, in London, New York, and Rome, they have a dressing room, and on the dressing room they have the quote, "Did they name the shoe after you or you after the shoe?" So it's been used a bit, but that's a true story.
Tell us about when David Bowie got affiliated with the shoe, and there was an ad campaign he was in.
Yeah, David Bowie was, obviously very popular at the height of his career, and we had a photograph of him, which is in the book as well, wearing the shoe and talking about, how comfortable it is and one he loves to wear.
We recently hosted the Beastie Boys at Live Talks Los
Really?
Angeles, and I understand they were fans too.
Well, they've got a good picture in there of the Beastie Boys. They were wearing Superstars and the Stan Smith in New York, and they talk about, how the Superstar was the first one they wore, then they started gravitating towards my shoes as well. But there's been a lot of people, like I said, you know, JayZ, one time my daughter, who's now 31, came home, she was 13, and she said, "Dad, you're famous." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, JayZ has you in one of his songs, and just sitting here chilling in my white Stan Smith Adidas." I said, "That's great. Who's JayZ?" But anyway, you know, Usher, you know, apparently said in People magazine he had the shoe in every color that was made at the time. And so there's been a lot of, you know, influencers that have worn the shoe, and they've done it not because they've been paid, but because they like it. And that's given it some credibility.
So there's a quote from JayZ in here. I'd love you to read it.
Okay. Lampin' in the Hamptons, the Weekends Man, the Stan Smith Adidas, and the Campus, or playing guts on the cruise. Hermes boat shoes and Izod bucket on. I'm so old school, JayZ.
Thanks a lot. So when you're not wearing Stan Smiths, Birkenstocks, what do you wear?
Well, I stick with these shoes quite a bit now. You know, I've got some loafers that I wear, and if it's maybe not appropriate, but what's happened today, which is really amazing, is that obviously people are becoming more casual, and tennis shoes around the world are becoming the shoe of choice. And so you're seeing a lot of companies now making shoes as close to this as possible. Because the shoe was done well. And in fact, Adidas had to sue a company because they got too close to the shoe. But you're seeing people wearing, you know, tennis shoes to meetings, you know, business meetings, to, you know, social events that are semi-formal, even formal, like I said, with the tuxedos. And so I'm wearing these shoes quite a bit, different colors and different styles and that sort of thing. But I wear them quite a bit.
I'm just curious, let's talk a bit about tennis. When you were playing tennis, did you have any sort of private routines you went through before a match or during a match? Or?
Well, you know, players have sometimes superstitions that are very, you know, clear in their mind, and sometimes it's subconscious sort of things. And I was playing without my shirt one time, and I kept going like this, tugging at my shirt. I didn't have the shirt on, and so evidently I developed this habit of kind of tugging at my shirt when I was playing. And it just became a subconscious sort of thing. And you know, I would bounce the ball a certain number of times before my serve. You know, twice before the serve, and if I missed my first serve, I'd bounce it once before the second serve. And that became a pre-serve routine, which I actually encourage. I have an academy at Hilton Head, and we have about 50 young players from 12 to 18. And so I encourage them to have these pre-serve routines and also pre-return of serve routines. But I would go, when I go to a tournament, usually I go to the same locker. I go to the same shower. I go to the same toilet. You know, I just kind of get in the habit of doing the same thing at that tournament. Then I go to the next tournament, and sort of the same thing would happen. And I'm sure there's some other things that I did that I didn't even realize I did.
Let's talk about some of your mentors as a tennis player. Pancho Segura?
Pancho Segura was hired by the Pasadena Tennis Patrons, who are a group of parents in the Pasadena area where I grew up. And the leaders of that was Lou and Linda Crosby. And they were both were in Hollywood. One did commercials for the Dodge commercial. That lady did commercials for Air and other commercials. And so they were in the Hollywood scene. But they loved tennis. They had 3 daughters, and they formed this foundation. And they hired Pancho Segura to come from Beverly Hills over to Pasadena every Saturday morning. And we would have a little training session at Pasadena High School. And at the time, Pasadena High School had kind of a peachish color court, pinkish color. and hardwire nets. And so it was not a country club sort of a setup, but he would come over and work with us for 4 hours, and then we would actually teach beginners. So we had a motto of each one teach one. But Segura was an unbelievable coach, and he was a little guy, about 5'6", from Ecuador, and he had bowed legs, he had rickets when he was a kid, so he had to think his way through matches because he couldn't overpower people. And he had a two-handed forehand, which was really unusual at the time, and a one-handed backhand. Today there's a lot of players with two-handed backhands and one-handed forehands, and he had kind of not a very good serve, but he could move like the wind, and he could volley well, and he was a very intelligent player. So he taught me a lot of things about strategic moves on the court. And so, in my opinion, he's the smartest guy that's ever played the game.
And any pointers or advice he gave you that applied off the court?
Well, he actually had some pretty colorful, jokes and stories that I couldn't repeat. But I learned a few things there that my parents weren't too excited about me learning. But he was not only very bright, but he was very outgoing, and it didn't matter whether you were a janitor or the President of the United States, he would treat you well. And I think that kind of has stuck with me a little bit, his concept of treating everybody the same. And he was a great man, had a great laugh, great smile, but he was also pretty colorful in his language.
So as a coach now, I feel there are sometimes really gifted athletes in whatever the sport is, from a skill point of view. What sort of abilities or what sort of skills do you see them missing or lacking, where a coach and strong coaching can kind of make the difference?
Well, sometimes great players are not very empathetic to the struggles of, young players or beginners or players that don't have as much talent. To some of the players, if you ask a guy like Ken Rosewall, he had one of the great backhands of all time. He said, "Ken, how do you hit that?" He says, "Well, I take it back like this, and I swing forward like this." Okay. It doesn't really help too much if it's not natural. So one of the things that helped me was this each one, teach one. So I had to teach from age 15 to 18, I had to teach beginners how to play. And so I had to try to figure out what would help them in not being natural, not having played the game. So that helped me in my coaching. But some top players are very good at relating to younger players who may not be as talented, and some just can't relate at all because they just expect you to, just like said Rosewell, you just take it back and do it this way, and why can't you do it? So you have to figure out different ways of how to communicate maybe the same concept. It may work with one player, but it doesn't work with another player. You have to tell a little different way. And that's the key to a great coach. My coach at USC was George Tolley, in my opinion, the best college coach ever. And he wouldn't say much, but when he'd say it, he had thought about it quite a bit. And so there might be 10 things he could say to me, but he'd pick the one thing that would help me the most. And then he'd have me experiment with it, and then come back and then evaluate how it was working, and then go on to the next area of need. So the great coaches understand what to zone in on. It's going to help you the most.
Let's talk about rivalries in tennis, and who were some of your rivals in the days you played, and what rivalries have you admired, seeing the ups and downs?
Yeah, the rivalries are great for the game because people get to see these great players play, more than once, over a period of time, and see some different results. Like I played Newcomb several times. I lost him a finals at Wimbledon. But beat him in a couple other tournaments. At Queen's Club was another tournament in England. Then Nastasi was a guy I played quite a bit, and we had totally different personalities. He was from Romania, really hot-blooded guy and temperamental, and I was a little more calm on the court. But we played at the Wimbledon final. We played in Davis Cup 4 times. We played in the Masters 3 or 4 times. And so that was a rivalry that lasted several years. But in today's time, one of the greatest rivalries is Chrissy Everett and Martina Navratilova. They play each other like 60-some times. And the record is pretty close, amazingly close. And then today you have Roger Federer and Nadal. And you also got Nadal and Djokovic. And also Federer and Djokovic. So you've got some of these guys now that have been playing for the last 10 years that have dominated the game. And one of those three guys, and you throw in Andy Murray, one of those four guys that won most of the Grand Slam events the last 10 years, probably 90% of the Grand Slam events. And so you've seen them play quite a bit. And their records are relatively close. I mean, Djokovic is now kind of getting on edge on both Nadal and Federer as far as head-to-head. But those rivalries are important.
Let's talk about the relationship between a player during a game and the audience and the fans. Now, certain players just had a way to win over the audience on top or on the bottom, and it just seemed like it gave them that extra adrenaline they needed at the time. I'm thinking McEnroe, Connors was good at that. How does that evolve?
Well, it really starts with your own personality. Like a Borg, for instance, and Borg and McEnroe had a great rivalry too. They had a movie about the two. But Borg's personality was very studied. He never emoted too much, where McEnroe was fiery. And so that helps those rivalries because you got two different personalities, and their games were totally different as well. So you had those two contrasting things with games as well as personalities. But you can't really change your personality too much, and that kind of can affect how you relate to the crowd. And then some people in the crowd like to see different personalities. Some people hated Connors or hated McEnroe. When they played each other, they didn't know, who to go for, and some didn't like to see him play. Then some loved him. They'd love to see, Connors spill his guts out there until the very last point. And McEnroe as well. So people say, well, McEnroe played better when he got upset, but I saw him actually beat Connors in the finals of Wimbledon one time, like 6-2, 6-1, 6-1. And he didn't make a peep. He was totally focused the whole time, and obviously he was winning, so it helped. But he played some great tennis, by just really focusing and not getting involved in outside things. And other players are very distracted. They're ADD, and they're looking at the guy selling hot dogs and popcorn, and they're looking at people in their box, whether they're moving or not, and if they're smiling or not. So some players naturally kind of relate to the crowd, either over a period of time. I think over a period of time, people liked McEnroe more because he wasn't winning near the end, and they were sympathetic to that, and they loved the fact that he tried hard. And Chrissy Everett was, they called her the Ice Maiden, she hated that term, and she and Martina had different personalities, different games. And so I think your personality really dictates how that's going to happen.
Let's talk about an incident that happened recently with Serena Williams and her spat with the chair umpire. Could you tell us about incidents like that and how they affect the game, either when they're right or when they're wrong?
Yeah, that was an amazing moment because there's several elements involved. One was whether she was been treated harshly because she was Serena and she felt she'd been treated harshly in general, or whether she's a woman, a male umpire, whether she was a mother or not. I mean, there's so many different things that came into it, that she was going for this, this 22nd, Grand Slam title, and then she's playing this Japanese girl, Naomi Osaka, who was the underdog, and then she got into it, and her temper got involved, and she said some things she might regret, and so there's a lot of different elements involved there, and some people supported her in different ways. There's two or three different elements there that you could be supportive of. But some people But it was, the saddest thing was that Naomi Osaka played great tennis and won the match. And the crowd was so involved in what had happened to Serena that even Naomi cried because she thought the crowd was not for her. But Serena did a very classy thing. She said to the crowd, please, don't boo anymore about the fact of how I was treated, but, give her her due respect. And that was nice. But that was a very strange moment.
Will the U.S., at least on the men's side, ever dominate tennis like we once did?
Over the years, it's been sort of a cyclical thing where you've had good players and not, and good players and not. But it's more difficult now because it's an international game. You see players from the former Eastern Bloc that are going out there and really working hard and are hungry. You see players from all over the world that are developing, just having the opportunity to play tennis. And knowing there's a big, pot out there if they can play well. And so I think the competition is going to make it more difficult for any country to dominate. But the U.S. has got a pretty good program going, a pretty good player development program going. They've got an unbelievable complex in Florida, USTA National Campus, where players can go from the United States and train. They've got good coaches, good facilities. And we have a handful of good young players that are coming along that could be good. This one girl, Corey Goff, is a very talented young girl. She's 15 years old, and she looks a little bit like Serena, like Venus, actually, a little taller and slender, and she's done very well in the junior Grand Slam events, and there's some other girls as well as some young boys. They're doing well. So we're going to have some good players out there, but it's going to be hard to dominate.
So Stan, you serve as president of the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Tell us about that.
Well, the Hall of Fame really is the epitome of the sport, and the players are really chosen for the International Tennis Hall of Fame based on their biggest tournaments results, the Grand Slam results, their Davis Cup results, their Fed Cup for the ladies, and the year-end tournament. And so I'm the chairman of our nominating committee, and we get nominations. Anybody can nominate anybody. Then we vet those and get those that really should be in the running. Then we have a committee at Wimbledon that goes through those and puts them on the ballot. And then we have about 120 people that vote for the players on the ballot. We also have a contributors section and a wheelchair section. So those three different areas: players, contributors, and wheelchair players. And so we put on the ballot, and the voters are really Hall of Famers or historians or media that vote for the players. And this year we had 8 players on the ballot, and the ballots are actually in. I know the winners. We're going to announce it at the Australian Open, and those are the players who are going to be in the class of 2019. So it'll be announced in Australia, and then we'll...
So 8 were on the ballot?
8 were on the ballot.
And how many will be announced?
Well, we have the winners are going to be announced. I can't tell you that to
No.
kill you. And then in Newport, the week after Wimbledon, we have the Hall of Fame Open tournament in Newport, Rhode Island, and it's also where they have the induction. So on the Saturday of that tournament, we'll induct those players that were voted on from those 8 that were voted. And the interesting thing this year was, for the very first year, we had fan voting. And so any fan could vote for these 8 players. And the player that got the most, we do have, that is public knowledge. Li Na from China got the most votes. She'll get 3% bump to her percentage that she has. You have to get 75% of the votes. So she got a 3% vote. Goran Ivanisevic got the second. He got 2%. And then Mary Pierce from France got 1%. Came in third, got 1% boost. And so the voters have the opportunity to affect the actual voting and who gets in. And so this is the first year, and we're going to, hopefully more people will know about it, will do it, and voting from anywhere in the world.
Fascinating. We have Pharrell Williams coming to our stage this weekend.
Do you?
Couple questions you think we should ask him?
Well, ask him if he's played any tennis lately, because we spent about 3 hours watching Serena play at the U.S. Open, and I kind of explained the game to him. He really didn't know a lot about tennis, and so when I left him, I said, Pharrell, you got to maybe play a little bit, and I doubt he has, so let's see if he's played any tennis. But he is one of I really enjoyed getting to know him a little bit. When he had the three, ask him how his triplets are doing. So he has a son named Rocket, then he had triplets. One is Wolf, Hawk, 2 boys, and a girl named Sun. And so I sent him a note saying, 3 kids, 3 stripes for Adidas, 3 Stan Smith shoes, a good way to start life. And so anyway, he and his wife are terrific, and they got their hands full, obviously, with triplets now. And so they have 4 children. And so you can ask him how he's sleeping.
We will. We certainly will. Last question I wanted to ask you is about just sort of the general state of tennis in the United States, the sport itself. It seems like it's shifted into more of a power game and less finesse. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a power game. The rackets are bigger, stronger, and the strings have also changed. The strings, there's a lot of strings now are really grip the ball, so you can really spin the ball. So if you put a lot of spin on, Jack Sock and Nadal are 2 of the players on the tour that have the most spin on the ball, and it's because these strings, and they come up. And so what we're seeing today is we're seeing big serves, and then the idea would hit a big serve, hopefully get a ball that you can attack on the next ball, then attack with your forehand. So it's kind of a serve plus 1 mentality, the big serve, and then maybe hit a forehand. Players are also moving well and getting to a lot of balls. Even balls are being hit pretty hard, but they're also getting to those balls, and then not only getting to balls, but hitting offensive shots off balls you wouldn't think they'd be able to do because they're just barely getting to it. So we're seeing good athletes in the sport today worldwide. We're seeing the game being aggressive, but there are very few serve and volleyers, which is what I did. I'd serve, come to the net, try to volley. Because of these rackets and strings, if you did that, and if you have a low volley which you can't hit as aggressive as you'd like, the player will get there in time, and then they can pinpoint these passing shots. And with a heavy spin, they can clear the net by quite a bit and bring the ball back in the court. So you're seeing players serve and stay back, looking for the first ball they can hit aggressively, then hopefully maybe come to the net then, or hit a winner if they can, or move the player around and come into the next shot. So some players almost never come in, except to shake hands at the end of the match, and then others are coming in a bit more. We're seeing players work their way to the net a bit more now than they were a few years ago.
Let's try something fun. This whole interview's been fun, but I want you to try to imagine a current day player playing, a star of the 80s or a star of the 70s. What pairings would be interesting?
Well, the first pairing I would love to see would be Borg and Nadal on clay. Borg, when I was playing, I played him a few times at the French Championships, and I actually beat him in Sweden when he was 16. The next year he went to Paris and won the French Championships at age 17. And he won the French Championships 6 times. And he was just, you could kind of, the analogy would be going to the dentist and have a root canal when you played him, because it was so painful. And you had to play aggressively but not miss to beat him. And almost nobody could do that. So he dominated the game on clay, and even won Wimbledon 5 times, which is a different surface and different strategy. So I thought he's the greatest clay court player that will ever live. And then Nadal's come along, he's won the French 11 times, and I mean, it's hard to believe how he's dominated the game. So those 2 players I'd love to see play each other. And I'd love to see Sampras and Federer on grass. These are the 2 dominant players on grass over the last 30 years or 20 years. And so that would be a great matchup. And then you've got other players that are unique. I mean, it'd be fun to see a McEnroe against a Sampras, playing at their best, because he was good on the grass. And then, Connors beat Borg on clay, actually, which was a surprise. And seeing Connors play. But in my top five, I would look in the men's side. I'd look at Federer, Djokovic, or Federer, Nadal, Borg, Laver. I would love to have seen Laver play against Nadal or on clay or Federer on grass, because he won the Grand Slam twice, winning all 4 tournaments the same year twice, and no one's done it since. So Laver is one of those guys up there. On the women's side, I'd love to see Margaret Court play against Serena, or Steffi Graf, who got stabbed in the back, and her career was really did not postpone totally or delayed or ended, but she was a great counterpuncher and attack balls, and so I'd love to see her play against Serena. There's other matchups. Steffi Graf, playing against Serena, because Steffi Graf was maybe the best player ever. Chrissy Everett, of course, playing against, let's say, Margaret Court, her steady, game against Margaret Court, kind of attacking. And Billie Jean would be fun to see play against anybody. She was fun to watch, and was totally doing commentary on her own game and commentary on the match and what was happening. But she was one of the great competitors, and has not only done so much for tennis, but done so much for women in general. And I just gave her it's her 75th birthday on, I guess I shouldn't say the age, but 75th birthday on Thanksgiving Day this year. And so I sent a video message to her, congratulating her on her birthday, and also thanking her on behalf of my daughters and my granddaughters for what she's done for women in general, not only in sport, but for lifestyle as well. So anyway, there's been some great players over the years on both the women's and the men's side that have made a huge difference, and you can go back to the very, not beginning, but Jack Kramer is from LA, and he was arguably the best player that's ever played the game. He was a father of the serve and volley game, aggressive type player, and he also helped to start the ATP, the Association of Tennis Professionals, and the union that we have today was started by Jack Kramer. So he made a big impact as a player. He also signed players to pro contracts early on before the circuit really took place, and then he helped start the circuit of what it is today.
Talk a little bit about the efforts that came to be to bring equity and prize money in tennis.
Well, the answer to that is Billie Jean King. She was the one that fought hard. They had the original 9, and these ladies signed a contract for $1 to form a women's professional association, and she was a leader of that. And they struggled early on to get sponsorship and to get events and that sort of thing, but they finally got on the board, and then she continued to fight for equal prize money, and the U.S. Open was the first one to get equal prize money. It was only, I guess, maybe 10 years now that all the tournaments, all the Grand Slam tournaments have equal prize money. And there's a lot of tournaments now that are, there's the 4 Grand Slams, then there's the 9 tournaments, the next 9 top tournaments around the world. They're called 1,000 series tournaments, and most of those tournaments now are both men and women, which has been an evolution of bringing the men and women together more instead of just the Grand Slam events. And so that's helped with the equity of not only prize money, but also court time, TV time. And it's a controversial concept. I mean, the promoters of the game that sponsor and sponsors of the game want to get the most out of their sponsorship, And they may feel they want to sponsor more men than women, or it depends upon the product as well. But some want to sponsor women more than men, and it's hard to know when you go to a Grand Slam event to talk to the fans. They're there to see both, men and women. And it's hard to say whether they're there more for the men or the women or that sort of thing. But the game is healthy in that respect because there are a lot of great women players now, and it varies each year as to, who's drawing fans in and who's not, and as far as the men and the women. But I think it's been healthy.
Sponsorship has really changed the sport. There's a watch, and then there's a car, and clothing, and how does that change an athlete?
Well, the athletes now have,
they're substantially pocketing some good money.
Yeah.
But other than that,
What's happened now is each athlete has his team, and it's made up of his coach, maybe his fitness guy, maybe a massage therapist, maybe even a stringer that he has for his own rackets, and then an agent, and then maybe part of the family and that sort of thing. And so the agents, and then it kind of cocooned these players to a certain degree. We used to kind of just say, okay, you want to practice tomorrow? Now we have the coach talking to the other coach that will practice at 11 or whatever it is. And so it's changed that to a certain degree, but the players, the agents are working as hard as they can to get these players these endorsement contracts. And so the contract has to be one that the player relates to and feels good about. It can't just be financial. Sometimes it is just financial, but the players are doing well off the court now. And if you're a star in, let's say, Italy, for instance, but maybe number 30 in the world, since you're the top Italian, you can get from the Italian companies the best contracts. Whereas if you're an American, let's say you're ranked 10 in the United States, maybe 40 in the world, you wouldn't get the same deals as a player who's ranked 1 in the United States for American companies. And of course, a lot of the companies now are multinationals, so that it's worldwide, a contract. So players are now very aware of what they're wearing, what the logos are on their rackets, what the logos are on their clothing, their shoes, and that sort of thing. And so it's become a real business. But at the same time, the top players love the game, and they play because they love the game. And the players are sort of down there at 40 or 50 in the world. They're just looking at the next paycheck, whether it's prize money or possible endorsements or possible sponsorship or possible appearances that they might make. And so it's, but the top players, again, they know that if they win matches, the rest of the financial side will take care of itself. And they're focused on winning Grand Slam events, playing Davis Cup, being number 1 ranked at the end of the year. Because all the contracts have bonuses, and they relate to what their ranking is at the end of the year, how many Grand Slam events they win, how many tournaments they win. And so those are pretty close to the mind of those players as they're playing.
Last question, Stan. When you're not coaching and you're not doing anything tennis related, what are some of your outside passions?
Well, my main thing is that I have a company called Stan Smith Events, and we help corporations entertain their clients at major events. And to be the 4 Grand Slam tennis events. We also are going to be helping a company at the Rugby World Cup next year in Tokyo, and the Olympics the next year in Japan. And so I've had the company for about 25 years, and it's been interesting. We do about 10 events a year, and the companies a lot of them have come back and renewed and done it again the next year, and we try to help them network with their clients at an event and bring in sort of a wow factor or something unique, because a lot of their clients, these corporations' clients, their top clients, can afford to get any ticket they want, but they may not be able to afford to have, John McEnroe come and speak to them before the matches, or sign memorabilia by Rafa or Fed or Serena. And so, we try to provide something unique to them that they can't get, or their clients can't get, and to help them So when they pick up the phone a month later, they can say, hey, Jim, what do you think about that Wimbledon final? Wasn't that unbelievable? We had, Boris Becker there. We had Tracy Austin there. And Stan Smith did this or whatever. And so it's been an interesting business, and our corporations have a lot of them have done it year after year. And so that's a big part of it. Then the Hall of Fame president, and then our little academy. And then I'm trying to spend time with my 13, soon to be 14 grandchildren. And that takes up most of my time.
And is a tennis racket involved in that interaction?
Well, it's starting to be. I actually, my 8-year-old, the one that did this drawing in the book, was playing a tournament, and he didn't know how to serve, and he was playing the next day, and he was playing with this big sponge ball and a small racket, which is a good way to start a young kid off with. And so I went out there and tried to get him to serve, learn how to serve. And the next day he didn't do too well, but he was into it a bit. And so they're now real young. The grandkids are real young, and so it's getting to be the stage where I might be hitting a few balls with them.
So no gardening is what you're saying?
I'm not a very good gardener. My green thumb is not green, and I've always been involved with balls. I played some golf as well, so I've never been involved in a lot of different things besides things that have to do with a ball.
Speaking of last question, we didn't say anything about him. Ivan Lendl was a big golfer, wasn't he? He was like a perfectionist even at that.
Yeah, his goal was to make the senior tour when he turned 50, but what derailed his goal was, one, he wasn't quite good enough, and two was he had 5 daughters, and 3 of the daughters were outstanding golfers. And so he actually unselfishly drove them around to various golf tournaments around the U.S. and supported them and did some coaching, which might have been unadvisable because, there's a bit of a clash. But and so he never really got to the point where he could play on that tour. And again, he probably wasn't quite good enough either. But most tennis players will do pretty well in golf. It's that hand-eye coordination, and I've got a lot of respect for golfers because, they can go south pretty quickly. But tennis players usually enjoy, playing golf and do pretty well.
All right, finally, the last question. Piece of advice you would give a young Stan Smith?
I think the most important thing is really enjoy the game. And when I talk to coaches and to parents, I said, look, you've got to get your kid into a situation where they're really enjoying some coaching and then enjoying the opportunity to compete. And at the same time, the definition of a great teacher, whether it's in school or in any situation teaching, is to the kid learn something without knowing it. So like I asked a kid, what's your favorite class in school? And he said, well, it's geometry. I said, is it because you're good at it? Is it because you like the subject, or is it the teacher? And a lot of times it's the teacher that makes the subject that you're learning fun. And so you need to have a teacher that makes it fun. And at the same time, you're learning good fundamentals, because you want to get the good fundamentals pretty early on so you don't have to keep changing as your career goes along. You want to get good fundamentals at the very beginning and build upon it. But enjoy that process, knowing that you might have a goal to be number 1 in the world, but you need to enjoy the process of trying to get to that goal you might have, and every day that you're out there.
Thanks. This is Stan Smith. The book is Some People Think I'm a Shoe. Stan Smith and the Shoe. Thanks for joining us. Take care.